The last time was kind of fun, so today we're looking again at Made by Jim Bob. Or, sorry, according to the outro of this video, it's Made by Jimob. I guess I misread it the first time. Anyway, this time we're talking about Arguments Against Atheism, The Problem of Evil, which is an interesting title considering that the problem of evil has nothing to do with atheism, so I'm curious to see where this goes.
In this episode, we take a look at the very popular atheist argument called the argument from evil.
Alright, but before we get into this, can I make a request? I can't stand that white background of yours. Feels like my retinas are gonna catch on fire. I tried chroma keying it out, and obviously I can, but you have all this text through the video and stuff, and it interferes with that, and it didn't look real good, and at a certain point it wasn't worth the hassle. But you could change it real easy. It's your video, up to you, but just thought I'd ask.
Which is often claimed to be a defeater to God's very existence.
Sure, maybe somebody claims that. People claim all kinds of things. But yeah, the problem of evil is not really an argument against God's existence. Not unless God is really rigidly defined as needing to have certain specific attributes, and otherwise fails to be a god at all.
Welcome to Arguments Against Atheism. I'm Jim Bob. I'm here to give you the goods.
The little catchphrase still doesn't work for me. Something about it just feels weird.
So what is the argument from evil?
What was the bell sound for? Why is it there? What are you trying to communicate with it? Seems like editing for the sake of editing. Anyway, the argument from evil, or the problem of evil. Well, basically what it is an argument about the compatibility, or lack thereof, of certain features proposed for God within certain religions, and the view of the world as seen from those religions. The basic idea is that if you have a God with features that absolutely mean it would not create objective evil, but the religion proposes that the world which is entirely created by God contains objective evil, then this view of God is incompatible with this view of the world. Different ideas of the religion are incompatible with each other. So essentially it's saying that there's a conflict at the heart of a belief system. In this case, specifically Christianity. And for this conflict to be resolved, something's got to give. Either there has to be some sort of compromise on the properties of God, or there has to be a reevaluation of the world, whether it contains objective evil. Or both.
I don't want to straw man it, so let's get it in precise form.
Saying it precisely doesn't mean you're not going to straw man it. I'm not saying you are going to straw man it. I don't know yet. I'm just saying I don't see what one has to do with the other.
The argument from evil goes as follows. Premise 1, God is omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipotent. Premise 2, an all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful God wouldn't permit suffering in the world.
Okay, so I already disagree with this formulation of it. And my objection here is that suffering is not necessarily defined by Christians as being objectively evil. They believe there are circumstances where suffering can be an objective good. That maybe the human undergoing the suffering doesn't understand why it's objectively good, but nonetheless it is, for some hidden reason. And so to me, this doesn't really get to the point of what the argument is really about. It allows much too much wiggle room. I would replace permit suffering there with cause objective evil, because that's really the key point here. If you are all good, you don't do evil. Another thing which I think is equally important, for some reason in the first premise you use the terms omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipotent, but in the second premise you switch to all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful. I feel like it's important to maintain consistency in the terms used in your syllogism. I would also see this argument as much more effective if instead of using the word omnibenevolent in one place and then translating that to all-loving in another place, you just use the term all-good, rather than all-loving. Each of them has some validity as a partial synonym for omnibenevolent. Neither of them really fully captures it, but all good is much more directly relevant and much more clear in this context. And every Christian I've ever run into who I asked about this has told me that God is all good, which is good because that's a direct contrast to evil. If instead they say God is all loving but not all good, which I've never seen personally, but it might happen sometimes, I don't know, you might have to change the argument a little bit to make it still work. And at that point, it may not exactly be the argument from evil or the problem of evil. It might be something else. The reason it's a problem of evil is because of the way evil relates to good. So ideally, I would take out all the omni forms and just say all-knowing, all-good, all-powerful in both places. That would remove a lot of confusion and a lot of wiggle room.
Premise 3. There is suffering in the world.
Probably goes without saying, but I have the same objection to the use of the word suffering there.
Conclusion. God knows suffering will occur, so he either can't stop suffering, so he's not omnipotent, or he refuses to, so he's not omnibenevolent.
It's kind of awkward to include extra premises in your conclusion. You could have separated some of those out, but I won't nitpick a lot on that. The argument's clear, at least. Again, of course, same objection to the use of the word suffering, and I also object to making this about God stopping suffering or objective evil that's already in the world, because the real point is that if God were all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, that the suffering or the evil never would have entered the world in the first place. There would be nothing to stop. He simply would not have created it or allowed it to be created in the first place. Also, it's interesting that you treat omniscience specifically as a given here by saying God knows suffering will occur, and then you treat omnipotence and omnibenevolence as the ones subject to question. They're all subject to question because the point is one of them's got to give, but you don't know which one it is. By which I mean it could also be that God doesn't know suffering is occurring, or that God doesn't know objective evil is created, and so he's not omniscient. This is the third option that you've missed. And a fourth option is that if God is defined as necessarily having all of these properties, then it could be that the objective evil that's supposedly in the world entirely contradicts his existence, and therefore God doesn't exist at all, which is the way that this would be used as an argument against the existence of God. Personally, I don't really use it that way. If I use this argument at all, it's usually because some theist brought it up, and then I tend to use this more as a way to question the consistency of their God belief.
Alrighty. Did you see any obvious problems?
Yeah, quite a few actually.
I did.
Good. You should have fixed them before you published the video.
Premise 2 states an all-knowing, all-loving, and all-good God wouldn't permit suffering in the world. Well, why not?
Well, I think you're right to question what you've written here, but before you question all this, you should be questioning if it's the problem of evil. You said you didn't want to strawman the problem of evil, and so you were going to state it precisely, and what you ended up doing was stating it extremely imprecisely and strawmanning it. And so now you're left with some kind of problem of the incompatibility of suffering with all lovingness, which may have merit, at least with a bit of work, but it's not the problem of evil. Not that I would recognize anyway. Now, assuming that you fixed the all-loving part and changed it to all good, but left the stuff about suffering, such that the word suffering basically becomes a stand-in for evil and is directly put up against all goodness. For this argument to work, you have to be using terms that directly relate to each other. Good versus evil, for example, not good versus suffering, because evil is tautologically evil, but suffering isn't. It could be defined that way, or it could be defined not that way. A Christian could see suffering as an objective good. It's really only a matter of definition, and at that point, if they've defined suffering as objectively good, well then an objectively good God would probably implement a whole lot of suffering in the universe. And this is why I wish you'd been more careful in your formulation of this argument.
What's the contradiction?
Well, if the Christian you're talking to defines suffering as objectively evil, then there is a contradiction then, but it's not really present in the actual wording of the argument. That's drawing in outside information that the argument itself doesn't present. It's kind of, what do they call that with movies? Headcanon? Again, I'm talking if we've already swapped out all loving with all good.
It seems this very low-level argument from personal incredulity has no basis.
I can kind of see what you're saying about personal incredulity here, because of the way the argument's phrased. You know, somebody thinks, I can't see how the existence of suffering is compatible with an all-good God, so it must not be compatible. I get it, and if that's presented as a universal generalization, there is a problem there. It's not always going to be a problem. If you're talking to the kind of Christian who thinks that suffering is an objective evil, then the word suffering in the argument counts as a placeholder for an objective evil, and then it works again. So it's not a total failure in all cases, but as I said, definitely it could be written much better to be more self-contained and consistent.
From a Christian view, long-suffering is actually a virtue.
Okay, I didn't know you were going to go there, but there you go. That's what I'm talking about. This is why your version of the argument is so flawed. All it takes is for the Christian to go, actually, I think suffering's not evil, and then you might as well have not made the argument at all. If you're going to make the argument this way, you really have to know the beliefs of the person you're talking to before you do it. If you've already got that person to agree that suffering is objectively evil, then go for it.
It is through suffering and sacrifice that we participate in the good. The overcoming of suffering is thematic in the Christian view and praxis.
Praxis? Somehow I didn't take you for a lefty type.
This premise also makes an assumption that suffering is evil.
No, it doesn't. The premise doesn't mention evil. The entire argument, as you wrote it, doesn't mention evil. It doesn't even seem to contain any implicit judgment about whether suffering is good or evil. It just says an all-loving God wouldn't permit suffering. That doesn't imply that suffering is evil. If anything, it implies that allowing something to suffer is unloving. The way you wrote the argument, it's not the problem of evil. And this is what I was trying to say before. This is why I was pointing out these details to you. If you mean to write an argument about evil, write an argument about evil. And it seems to have been what you wanted to do because now you're talking about evil. You need to be more careful to avoid inconsistency and imprecision.
My question to the atheist is, what makes suffering evil?
I don't know. What's that got to do with the argument? The argument doesn't say anything about that. Maybe if it did, I'd comment further.
That depends on what you mean by evil.
Parodying Jordan Peterson, too. Maybe you are a lefty type. I don't know. Anyway, yes, thank you, Cartoon Peterson. If this argument included the word suffering and equated that word with evil, then it would depend on what you mean by evil. If by evil the Christian means something that includes suffering in general, then fine, the argument's okay. But if the Christian that you're talking to doesn't mean that, then it doesn't work. It really all depends what the Christian means because, of course, the entire point of the argument is to express something about the consistency of the beliefs with themselves. And so if you're not representing the beliefs correctly, this argument has no relevance.
Is having an infected tooth evil?
I don't know. I never talked to a Christian about that. But that tooth looks like he's gone full Dark Brandon.
Is a hurricane evil?
That doesn't look like a hurricane, but that cloud looks pretty evil. I wouldn't trust that cloud.
What about a lion eating a baby zebra?
No, that lion looks pretty cool. No red eyes, no horns, not even visible fangs. I feel like I can trust this guy.
Is that evil?
Oh, now he's a red armband, small mustache lion. Now I disavow the lion.
These are all examples of things at most we find unpleasant.
Okay, so you don't think things like hurricanes count as a natural evil? You don't have that idea? Whether hurricanes are bad is just a matter of personal preference? All right, then if that's your belief, that's your belief. In that case, I don't think I'd bother to use that kind of an argument with you. But your beliefs don't represent every Christian.
If I went to a restaurant and found the chicken special to be unpleasant, would it make sense to leave a review that stated, "Don't get the chicken. It was immoral"?
The chicken was immoral, or being served an unpleasant meal at a restaurant was immoral? Because you could say, if you were a person who thought that not serving adequate food was a moral flaw, that the people in charge of the food that day behaved immorally towards you. You and I both probably disagree with the person who would say that, unless it was really egregious, but it's a coherent statement. It makes sense. It's a judgment of human actions according to some moral standard. And if you mean literally the chicken itself is immoral, then no, I and apparently you don't think that makes much sense. Presumably, neither of us thinks that it makes much sense to apply that label to something in that category of thing. However, if you're the kind of person who thinks that a rock falling on someone's head or a hurricane is a natural evil, then maybe, in that case at least it's consistent within your worldview. And again, this is the problem with saying that an argument like this, especially formulated this way, just flat out doesn't work, period. Because the fact is, there are people for whom this argument, even formulated in this strange way, will be applicable and effective. It seems that it's not phrased in such a way that it applies well to you, but that's okay.
No, that's silly.
Okay. You don't think chicken is immoral. Noted.
Preferences are preferences, not ethical stances.
Well, if the preference is about the ethical acceptability of human actions, then by definition they would be ethical stances. You're intentionally using an example that most people would say has nothing to do with ethics, because most people would say that ethics is related to expectations for human behavior, or the behavior of other sentient beings. You're misapplying this concept. You're applying it to the wrong category. Between the last video and this one, I'm detecting a pattern. But at this point, we're off into irrelevant territory as far as the argument's concerned. Now we're almost into the subjective morality territory, and that has nothing to do with this argument, which is fundamentally about the objective good and evil beliefs of Christians.
Now, a very similar position on morality was introduced and made popular by atheist Sam Harris in his book, The Moral Landscape.
Okay, what does that have to do with the argument? We're talking about an argument about the internal consistency of certain strains of religious belief. What does any non-theistic idea about morality have to do with this?
Sam's position was this. Morality is based on the maximization of sentient well-being. And I think we could all agree that suffering is bad.
I gotta admit I like the cartoon, especially his short little legs. I don't know why, but that just gets me. But as funny as I find it, I don't think it has a lot of purpose being here, because Sam Harris's ideas are not relevant to the discussion. We're not talking about Sam Harris's ideas. We're not even talking about an argument that involves any atheist idea at all. So why is Sam here?
Well, no, Sam, we don't all agree. For one, you have to define suffering, as does the atheist who is using the argument from evil.
Well, no, because for one thing, if I used it, it wouldn't include the word suffering. And for another thing, if I did include the word suffering for some reason, that would be because it was made relevant by the definition of the Christian who I'm discussing this with. If I'm talking about the consistency between ideas someone else has, my ideas aren't relevant.
Perhaps the atheist will say, I think that it's fairly obvious that pain is the defining feature of what we call suffering.
Whether I would or wouldn't say that has nothing to do with anything, because what I think suffering is has nothing to do with the argument, which is about what the Christian thinks it is. Why do responses to the problem of evil always seem to come down to this misunderstanding? I think it's very clear that the argument is about theist beliefs, not atheist ones. So why does it always come back to atheist beliefs which were never mentioned?
Well, that's not obvious. What's obvious is that we find pain unpleasant. We also find that human beings have the capacity to overcome pain.
Nobody cares. Get back to the point.
Keep in mind, there are people who are born without the ability to feel pain, and yet they arguably suffer more than those who can feel pain.
Okay, now we're in a discussion about whether pain specifically means physical pain and whether suffering is specifically pain and what atheists think suffering is. Should I just let you ramble about this for a while and come back when you finally get back to the point of the video?
Well, I suppose we could redefine it and say that emotional and mental...
Okay, yeah, I'm just going to scroll voice this part and come back when you're done with your tangent. Jesus Christ, what a waste of time. All right, back to the topic, roughly speaking.
Now, for the sake of the argument, what if we grant the atheist that evil exists in the world?
Sure, let's do that. So, is the existence of objective evil something that you find yourself especially hard-pressed to grant as a Christian? Fair enough, I guess.
If evil exists, this necessitates an absolute standard for good.
It's not even really that it's a separate standard. It's kind of the same scale. And of course, in the Christian belief, you have this scale. You have this objective standard of what is good and what is evil, and the source of the standard is God, and the point of the argument is to question whether the God as it's defined, with all of the features that the particular person you're talking to would grant it, is consistent with their belief in a world that includes things which objectively match the objective standard of what is evil, which they believe in.
The moment the atheist says evil does in fact exist, beyond our opinions or our preferences, then they are also saying an absolute standard of good exists.
Okay, but again, what atheists believe has nothing to do with this. When an atheist uses this argument, this is not the atheist saying objective evil exists. This is the atheist discussing the consequences of the Christian's belief that objective evil exists. The atheist may or may not believe in objective evil. That's not relevant. The argument never once brings up the beliefs of atheists. The argument is entirely and completely focused on the beliefs of the theist.
So, what is this good standard? We've already established that it's not maximum well-being, because the maximum well-being can be attained through causing suffering to others.
Okay, and now we're in a discussion about what the atheist standard of objective good is, apparently. So the question is, did you completely miss the point, or are you intentionally trying to muddy the waters with irrelevant nonsense? I suspect it's probably just the former.
In conclusion, the problem of evil, or the argument from evil, quite easily reduces to a Reddit-level slogan. If God real, why bad thing happen?
No, it's a question of the internal consistency of religious belief.
If God real, why not I get into art school?
So now we're just killing time until the end? All right, well, I guess most of my work is done. That's good.
If God real, why come I need oxygen to live? If God real, why come I'm not God?
On second thought, maybe you were missing the point on purpose just to have an excuse to use your cartoons.
Out of the many atheist arguments against God, I think the argument from evil is one of the most worthy of the trash bin.
Well, if that's how you feel, that's fine, but at this point it's become clear that you don't even know what the argument's about. For some reason you think it has something to do with atheist morality. I'm not really interested in taking advice from a guy who doesn't even know what the topic is.
There is no problem of evil from the atheist perspective.
Yeah, I know. This is why you don't see Christians coming up with some problem of evil to lob back at atheists. The problem of evil is about the consistency of certain Christian and some other theist perspectives, not the atheist perspective, which is why I said I'm not interested in taking advice from a guy who doesn't even know what the conversation is about.
There is only a problem of things you don't prefer.
What the atheist using this argument thinks about morality is meaningless. You would think you would have been tipped off to what the argument is about by the first premise, which talks about God's nature. I would have thought that would make it pretty clear that the argument is about theist beliefs, but somehow apparently not. Alright, well, always a good time, Jim Mob. And thank you everybody for watching. If you would, before you go, please do give the video a like and click subscribe if you haven't. And if you like the channel, maybe consider supporting. A couple of bucks per video or per month is enormously helpful, and huge thanks to all of my supporters who've already made that choice. Early access, email list, list.logicked.com, and I'll see you next time.